So today I'd like to talk about a phenomenon I've coined the martyrdom effect. And as the title of this presentation suggests, this is about pain, suffering, and sacrifice. But don't worry, I'll try to make this funny. This is also about charity and charitable giving, something I've had a long-standing interest in. Now, the specific topic I'll be discussing today is something that I got inspired in kind of by accident in grad school. So one of my fellow grad students one day came to the office and she was suffering from terrible pain and she had these awful cramps, and I asked her, well, what's going on? And she said, oh, I just ran this marathon for charity. Now, I think like most people, my reaction was, a very positive one. Wow, look, she's raising money for a great cause, and she's willing to do this challenging event to do so. That's amazing. But later on, I got to thinking, and I found this really puzzling and interesting. Now, let me explain why I found this puzzling and interesting. And to do that, let's talk a bit about what we know about human motivation. So if you look at many theories of human behavior, both in the biological sciences and the social sciences, they paint a picture of human motivation that looks something like this, right? So the idea is, people are motivated by incentives. In particular, we seek out positive rewards, pleasures, right? And we also want to avoid pain and effort, okay? Especially when we don't need to have pain and effort. And actually, this was well said by Jeremy Bentham, who wrote, "Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do." Right? So again, the idea is that, generally we're seeking out pleasure, we're avoiding pain and effort, right? That makes sense. Except that if you really buy into this view of human motivation, then there's a lot of puzzles that need to be explained. So for example, one puzzle that's interested a lot of researchers is the fact that people are giving money to charity, right? The idea that we're giving away our resources to complete strangers, right? We don't expect to have, those resources returned to us or have the favors returned to us, yet people are doing this. I think that's a pretty interesting question, but it's received a lot of attention in, again, many different fields. What I think is a much more interesting question is not the fact that we are giving away money to good causes, but the way in which people are choosing to raise money for charity, right? So again, if this is your view of human nature, then, oops, my bad. If this is your view of human nature, then the idea is you should be seeing fundraisers that are really fun, pleasurable, right? So we should be seeing massage challenges, dessert-a-thons, and so on, right? This should be the face of charitable giving, right? This should be what fundraisers look like, what people engage in fundraisers look like. But if you look at many of the popular fundraisers today, the face of fundraising looks a lot more like this, right? These are people enduring pain, suffering through these endeavors to raise money for charity. And as I'm sure you know, they come in many forms. You've got walkathons, you've got marathons, bike-a-thons, swim-a-thons, just fill in the blank-a-thons. In fact, some people aren't satisfied just to run in shorts and t-shirt. Some people need to go the extra step. So if you think running a marathon in a shorts and t-shirt is difficult, try running a marathon in a pink bunny suit. Or try running a marathon in a gorilla suit. You think that's not hard enough? How about a gorilla suit inside of a pink bunny suit? That's got to be really, really hard. But it doesn't even end there, right? So some fundraisers will have people walk on burning hot coals in their bare feet to raise money for charity. Or broken glass to raise money for charity. And this is one of my favorite ones. I saw this when I was in grad school. This is the Firecrack Challenge. This is their website back in 2007. If you look closely, they're promising that you get to experience walking on both fire and broken glass in the depths of the desert to raise money for a charity of your choice. But let me keep going. You also have people diving into freezing cold water to raise money for charity. And of course, a few years, as you all know, this happened, right? People pouring freezing cold water on their faces to raise money for charity. So what's going on? Why are people enduring all this pain and effort to raise money for charity, right? They could, just send a check or something, right? Well, this is what we call the martyrdom effect, okay? Now, I know people associate martyrdom oftentimes with religion. That's actually a very narrow definition, okay? A much broader definition that you'll see in dictionaries. For example, this one, I think I saw this in the Oxford Dictionary. A martyr is basically someone who suffers sacrifices for a cause in general, right? And martyrdom is the state of being a martyr. So when we say the martyrdom effect, we're looking what's the effect of having to suffer for a cause, right? Any cause, in this case, charity. And what we found in our research is that if you make charitable giving contingent on a painful and effortful experience, it kind of adds meaning, right? It adds symbolic value to the donation process, the donation itself, and as a result, people will donate more when the fundraising is painful and effortful compared to when it's easy and enjoyable. So I want to talk to you about the research I did in grad school. This is also with my PhD advisor, Eldar Shafir, looking at this martyrdom effect in the context of charity fundraising. So the first study I ever ran, we had a group of participants, and we asked them to imagine this scenario. This was right after the Asian tsunami in 2004. We asked them to imagine that there was an organization raising money for the victims of the tsunami. And the idea is you could enter this fundraiser by donating some money, and if you completed the fundraiser, they would match your donations. So for half the participants, right, if we ask the participants if the fundraiser is a charity picnic, how much would you donate to participate? And our participants said just under $15 on average. Now if we made it more effortful, we say, what if it's a 5-mile run, okay, that you have to complete to raise money? There people were willing to donate 50% more to do something more difficult, more painful. Now when I first saw these results, I really couldn't believe them. I found them really surprising. So I ran the same experiment right after Hurricane Katrina. So this time the cause became Hurricane Katrina, but I got the exact same results. Now what's interesting is this martyrdom effect actually holds mainly when the cause involved human suffering. So if, for example, we did a study where the cause was either raising money for starving children or a public park, and the fundraiser was either a fast, right, fasting, going out without food, or going to a picnic to raise money. And what you see is for starving kids, people will donate more if they have to fast to raise money than going to a picnic. But if it's raising money to build a public park, there's no difference, right? So when the cause involves fighting human suffering and the fundraiser involves human suffering, people doing this kind of painful task, people will donate more, right? But if the cause doesn't involve human suffering, then people are not going to walk on broken glass to raise money for the Girl Scouts, basically, right? And in fact, as you know, it's not just an effect of people donating more so they can participate. We also find that people donate more to sponsor their friend if she's going to do something painful, right? So if a friend approaches you and says, will you donate money for breast cancer? If she just says, I really care about breast cancer, but she's not going to really do anything, then people are willing to donate about $10. If she tells you she's going to run a 10-mile race to raise money for breast cancer, then they'll donate nearly 3 times as much. Now what's interesting, if she says, I want you to donate for breast cancer, but I'm going to run for a completely different charity, then they're donating just as little as if she wasn't running at all. Basically, people are saying, look, I'm happily donate to you if your suffering is going to be associated with my money. If you're going to suffer for something else, I'm not interested. That's what people seem to be saying. And in case you're wondering, this is not just stuff we see in the lab. These are actually data, real data from a fundraiser that was done 3 years in a row for multiple sclerosis. And what you see is this was a bike-a-thon. People could bike either 25 miles, 50 miles, or 170 miles. And what you can see is the farther people biked, the more money they raised on average. Now, you might look at these data and say, well, maybe people are donating more to their friends who are suffering because they're signaling that they care more about the fundraiser. OK, so consider the following scenario. You have a friend who approaches you and says she's going to do something really painful, difficult. She's going to bike across the desert to raise money for victims of war. Okay? And before she goes, she tells you, look, I think this is going to be really hard. I think I'm going to have a really difficult time, but I'm going to do this. So she's clearly signaling that she cares a lot. So we did this study. And what happens is, in one condition, participants receive a call halfway through, and their friend tells them, you know what, this is actually a lot of fun. Okay? This is actually surprisingly difficult. It's much worse than I expected. People are willing to donate a lot more. But if instead she says, I'm actually having a blast, then they're willing to donate less. So even though she's signaling that she cares going forward, they'll donate less if she ends up actually having fun than if she ends up suffering even more than she expected. So it's not just about responding to your friend's signal. It's really we want people to suffer. We find it more meaningful in that case. So let me talk to you about a last study. We wanted to get this kind of outside of the context of charitable fundraising because it has all these culture aspects to it. So we wanted to do something kind of cleaner. So we did what's called a public goods game, okay, involving real money in this case. So we brought in these 4 participants, for example, in the typical game. And the way the public goods game works is you give each person a sum of money. In this case, we gave them $5. I was this poor grad student, so I didn't have huge funds. And the way the game works is each player decides anonymously, independently, how much money they want to contribute to the collective pot, right? So they can give some portion of it. And they do so, again, without knowing what the other players are going to do. So every person's making their own decision in private. Whatever gets donated to the public pot gets pulled together, doubled, and redistributed evenly. So what this game is doing is pitting a self-interest, which is the way to make the most money is to keep all the money and hope everyone else contributes, versus a collective interest. If everybody contributed everything, everybody would end up with the most, okay? So there's this kind of conflict. So we ran this study, so we brought in participants, and the way we did it, we brought in the 4 people into one large room, And one by one, I took them into a separate, smaller room where I explained the rules of the game, and they made a decision about how much they wanted to contribute or not. Okay? And when they were done, they went back to the room, and the next person won. This is the sort of standard way we did the game. We also had this alternative version, which you might call the ice bucket challenge condition, where it was the same idea, except we told them, if you want to contribute, you're going to have to keep both hands in freezing cold water for 60 seconds in order for that amount of money to double. Okay? So we basically made it more painful for them. Now, this is a really painful task. I tried it on myself, I can tell you. We didn't take pictures of the participants at the time, but if you look on the web for pictures about people doing this kind of task, this is what you see, right? So you get the idea. It's not a fun task. So what do we find? In the standard version, our participants were donating or contributing about just over $3 out of the $5, okay? But in the painful cold water task, they donated significantly more, $4 out of $5, when we made it actually more painful to them. Now, this is kind of a cute lab study, and we ran this in 2006. It turns out that about 8 years later, millions of people basically kind of replicated this experiment, right? Celebrities, Sesame Street characters, Muppets. And it's not just kind of Hollywood celebrities and then people. If you're interested if you're following the political election in the US, you can see how Ted Cruz responds to the Ice Bucket Challenge.
I'm challenging President Obama, my son Donald, my son Eric. Let's go, ladies.
Okay. So clearly, Bentham's idea is not entirely right? We're not just always kind of set out to avoid pain and effort. In fact, sometimes, in the context of fundraising, making something more painful and effortful actually motivates people to donate more. So now I wanted to turn to something else that Jeremy Bentham is famous for saying. It is the greatest good to the greatest number of people, which is the measure of right and wrong. In other words, this brings me to my question. Are these painful, effortful fundraisers the most efficient means of improving welfare? Is this the best way to help the most number of people? And I would argue, I'm not so sure, right? There's a lot of opportunity costs. All the time, money, energy that's spent preparing these events, training for these events, participating in these events, that's time, money, and energy that people could be spending, working extra time to raise more money for charity or so on, right? Of course, there's also actual costs like healthcare risks and so on, people getting injured. There's even mortality risks. Every now and then, someone dies trying to run one of these marathons. But I think the best way to illustrate this is this phenomenal study about people doing parachuting for charity, right? This is something, I don't know if it's very popular in the US. In the UK, it's very popular for people to say to their friends, look, I'm going to do something I'm really scared of. I'm going to jump out of a plane. Will you sponsor my jump? So I want to show you one of the most hilarious papers I've ever read, which is bizarre because it's in the medical journal, and the journal is called Injury. But let me just read the abstract to you, okay? So all parachute injuries from 2 local parachute centers over a 5-year period were analyzed. 94% of these injuries were first-time charity parachutists, right? So all these charity parachutists are getting injured. And mind you, by the way, this is in the UK, so they have National Healthcare Service. If you go to the hospital, you get injured, that's taxpayers who are going to pay for your recovery, right? The injury rate in charity parachutists was 11% at an average cost of over £3,000 per casualty. 63% of the casualties were charity parachutists who required a hospital admission at an average cost of over £5,000. So that's how much they're costing the system every time they do these charity parachute runs. Now, how much money are they raising? The average amount raised was £30. And if you do the calculations, they find each pound raised for charity costs the National Health Services just over £13 in return. Okay, so they conclude parachuting for charity costs more money than it raises, carries a high risk of personal injury and so on. Basically, don't do it. But the real kicker in the paper is later on you read that you find out 70% of the donations raised were for NHS-related causes. So people are they're raising money for the National Health Service, and they're costing it more money than they were. So this brings me to my question: why can't we do better? Right? Can we do better than sort of wasting energy, time, and maybe costing the system money? Why can't we have tree planting marathons to raise money for, let's say, breast cancer, or garbage cleaning challenges to raise money for, I don't know, poor kids, right, and so on? I'd love to see that. I'd love to see this kind of 2 birds with 1 stone approach. And if there are any charities or organizers of charities who are watching this talk, I hope you guys get inspired by this. I'd really like to see this kind of idea going forward. Thank you.